Music. The meteor shower was supposed to be. Nothing. Dorian had seen a dozen of them. In his 6 years patrolling the northern ridge of Heron IV, lights in the sky. Little noise, maybe a scorch mark in the trees if something actually hit. He packed the same gear he always packed. Ration bars, a medkit, a scanner, and a jacket, and walked out before sunrise. Because that was the job. The ridge was quiet, the pines smelled like cold sap and dirt. His boots were wet from the grass by the time he reached the slope. And the scanner was picking up residual heat trails from 3 separate impact points clustered together less than 2 km north. He almost called it in first. Then he decided to look. The crater was not large. It was maybe 8 m wide still. Warm at the edges with a ring of scorched earth and flattened trees. Around it, 3 objects had hit in close formation, not random debris. They had fallen together. 2 of them had already cracked open. Dorian stopped at the rim and looked down. His hand moved toward his radio and then stopped there. Not pressing anything. They were the size of large dogs, scaled dark green on the back, paler underneath, with small folded structures along their spines. That might have been wings if they were bigger. They were wet from the inside of whatever had carried them here. One was sitting upright, staring at him with orange eyes that did not blink. The other had its face buried in the dirt and was making a low, constant sound. Not a growl, not a cry, something in between. The third object was still whole. Dorian watched it for a moment. Then it moved. The crack started at the top and ran all the way down in one slow line. A sound came from inside, high and sharp, almost painful to hear. The shell split. Something small and dark and absolutely furious tumbled out of it, rolled twice in the dirt, and then sat up. It looked directly at him. It was smaller than the other 2. Its scales were a deep gray-green. Its eyes were yellow, and it had a smear of golden fluid across its face from the egg. It made a sound, not a growl, not a cry. Something that Dorian's translator unit could not process, but something in his chest understood anyway. It was the sound of finding something after being lost. He pressed his radio. Control. This is Vale. I've got a situation at Grid North 7. Go ahead, Vale. Meteor impact confirmed, but I've got 3 biological contacts. Unknown species hatchlings, I think, requesting guidance. A pause. Define unknown. I mean, I don't know what they are. They're alive. They look young. He watched the small gray-green one take one careful step toward him, then stop. They look scared. Another pause. Longer. Hold position. Do not approach. Containment team is 4 hours out. Understood. He stood at the rim for about 2 minutes. The one with orange eyes had not stopped staring at him. The one with its face in the dirt had gone quiet. The small gray-green one sat in the broken shell and shivered. 4 hours was a long time to stand at the rim and watch something shiver. Dorian climbed down into the crater. He kept his movement slow. He did not reach out. He sat down in the dirt about 3 m away and opened pack. He took out a ration bar, the kind with dried protein and grain, pressed into a block, and broke a piece off. Orange-eyed one watched him. It did not move. He set the piece on the ground between them and leaned back. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the reckless one, the one that had been face down, lifted its head, sniffed, walked over, and ate the piece directly out of Dorian's hand before he could react. It looked at him after, then it looked at the pack, then it looked at Him again. Yeah, all right, Dorian said quietly. He broke more pieces. He set them out. The orangeyed one came forward slowly, sniffed everything twice, and then ate with precise, careful bites, watching him the whole time. The small gray-green one did not come to the food. It stayed in the broken shell. Dorian broke a small piece and held it out low to the ground. He did not move toward it. He waited. It took a long time, long enough that his arm got tired. Then the small one walked over one step at a time and took the piece from his fingers so gently he barely felt it. Then it sat down on his boot. It was not an accident. It looked up at him, made that untranslatable sound again, and closed its eyes. Dorian looked at the three of them, one raiding his pack, one watching his face, one asleep on his foot, and then looked up at the gray sky over the ridge. Control, he said into the radio. Go ahead, Vale. Push the containment team back. Everything's stable here. He filed his report 3 hours later from the crater floor with his jacket draped over the small gray-green one because it kept shivering. The report said everything it needed to say in one line. Found 3. They appear to be mine now. Nobody had written a manual for this. Dorian had checked. He had spent 2 nights going through the colonial database, the Galactic Species Index, and 3 separate archived xenobiology records. There were entries on dragons, short, vague, mostly warnings, words like territorial, volatile, apex level threat, nothing about what to feed a hatchling at 3:00 in the morning when it would not stop making noise. He named them in his head because he needed something to call them that was not the orangey one forever. Sara for the oldest, who watched everything with those unblinking amber eyes. Nico for the middle one, who had already knocked over his shelf unit twice and seemed proud of it. Bricks for the smallest, the gray-green one, who had fallen asleep on his boot that first night and had not fully accepted that she was allowed to sleep anywhere else. The first week was difficult. Sara would not sleep unless she could hear a heartbeat. Dorian discovered this at 2:00 in the morning, when she kept pressing her ear to the wall between her sleeping space and his room. He moved her bedding next to his cot. She was asleep in 4 minutes. Nico set fire to the kitchen on day 3. Small fire, just a patch of countertop, and it was out in seconds. But the second time it happened, Dorian sat down with him, held up one finger and said, "Not in the house," with the kind of flat patience that left no room for argument. Nico looked at the finger, looked at Dorian, did not set fire to anything inside. After that, Bricks would not eat unless Dorian ate first. Not just started eating, first bite had to happen, then she would approach the food. He did not know why. He stopped questioning it and just made sure they always ate at the same time. He was tired in a way he had not been tired in years, and he did not particularly want to stop. Commander Ray arrived on day 9. She was not someone who knocked. She walked into the ranger station, looked at Sara sitting in the corner, organizing small rocks into a careful line, looked at Nico asleep upside down on the couch with one leg hanging off, looked at Bricks pressed against Dorian's side with her eyes half closed, and then looked at Dorian. "The council has been notified," she said. "I figured they would be. There is a research facility on Station Marin, clean space, full biological monitoring, specialist staff." Dorian poured himself a second cup of coffee, who stays with them at night. Ray paused. The staff rotates in 8-hour shifts, who stays with Sora when she wakes up and there's no heartbeat. Nearby, Ray did not answer that. Who does? Bricks watch eat before she'll touch her food. How many of those specialists know that Nico responds to one raised finger, but completely shuts down if you raise your voice? He set the cup down. I'm not being difficult. I'm telling you what happens if you move them to rotation of strangers right now. They're not stable enough. The bond is too new. Dorian Ray's voice was careful. These are not animals when they are fully grown. When they are fully grown, we can have a different conversation. He met her eyes. Right now they are scared and they are small and they have not eaten a full meal without me sitting across from them. I'm not releasing them. Roy did him for a long moment. I cannot simply ignore a council directive then escalate. I'll wait. She left. Bricks watched the door close, then went back to pressing against Dorian's side. Sora did not look up from her rocks. Nico rolled over on the couch and fell off, caught himself and looked around to see if anyone had noticed. Dorian had noticed. He always noticed. The next 3 weeks were quieter in terms of outside pressure, but louder in terms of everything else. Nico learned to fly. Short, chaotic bursts that usually ended in a wall or a tree. Dorian started patting the corners. Bricks discovered that she could dig and began excavating the garden in long, careful trenches that she would fill back in and then dig again. Sora began sitting outside at night watching the sky. On the 4th night, Dorian brought his camp chair out and sat beside her. She did not say anything. He did not either. They sat there for an hour. On day 31, a galactic council shuttle entered Heron IV's orbit. Dorian saw the notification on his comm and looked up at the window. Sora was already there, standing still, watching the light of it cross the dark sky. The sound she made was low and quiet, not fear, something older than fear. Dorian walked over and put his hand on the top of her head. She was up to his shoulder now. Her scales were warm under his palm. I see it, he said. She did not move away. She leaned into his hand slightly, just enough to feel. They stood at the window together and watched the shuttle descend. Ambassador Voss had a folder. It was thick. It had been compiled by 6 different council departments, cross-referenced with military archives, and flagged at the highest level of concern. She had read it on the shuttle ride down and had read it again that morning. She knew the numbers. She knew the worlds. She knew what a fully mature dragon could do to a planet's surface in 72 hours. She had come to Heron IV expecting a situation, a dangerous human who did not understand what he was holding. 3 creatures that needed to be removed before sentiment got someone killed. She knocked on the door of the ranger station with that folder under her arm. The door opened and something large pressed its face into her stomach. Voss took 1 step back. The creature saw her. She would later learn, pulled its nose away and stared at her. Not aggressively. It stared the way a senior official stares at a new employee they have not decided about yet. Come in, said the man behind it. She's just checking you. Dorian Vale was not what she expected either. She had expected someone nervous or defensive or trying to perform calm. He just looked like a man who had been awake since early morning and had things to do. He stepped back to make space and went back to whatever he had been doing at the table. There were 3 of them. Voss stood in the doorway and looked. Sora had returned to a corner of the room where she was arranging small stones in a grid. Pattern precise work. She adjusted each stone with the tip of one claw, then leaned back to look at the whole arrangement. The middle one, Nico, was climbing the far wall using the window ledge as a foothold and had nearly reached the ceiling. The smallest bricks were sitting on the floor directly next to Dorian's chair with her eyes half closed, one claw resting on top of his boot. "I'd like to observe," Voss said. "I know why you're here," Dorian said. "You can observe, just don't crowd Sora. She doesn't like it when someone stands behind her." Voss pulled out a chair near the door and sat down. She opened her folder. She looked at it and then at the room and slowly closed it again. She watched for 1 hour without speaking. She watched bricks pull a piece of heavy fabric from a pile in the corner and drag it in a slow circle until she had made a shape she was satisfied with. Then she sat in the middle of it and stared at Dorian until he glanced over and gave one small nod. She appeared to have been waiting for exactly that, because she lay down immediately. She watched Nico fall off the ceiling. It was always coming and hit the floor with a sound that should have hurt. He shook himself, looked around the room, and then walked directly to Dorian and tried to show him the dent he had made in the plaster near the ceiling. He made a series of sounds. Dorian looked at the dent, then at Nico, and said, "I see it," in a tone that meant both. "I see it, and we will discuss this later." Nico looked extremely pleased with himself. She watched Sora finish her stone arrangement, sit back and look at Dorian in silence. He was writing a report. He glanced up, looked at the stones and said, "Good." That was all. Sora turned back and began a second arrangement beside the first. Voss wrote more notes than she had planned. She approached the subject professionally. She told Dorian she was not his enemy. She told him the council's position was based on documented history, not bias. She told him the risk was not imaginary. Dorian said he knew. She told him that when these three were fully grown, no ranger station on a colony planet would be sufficient. That containment would require infrastructure, resources, and a level of planning that had not yet been done. Dorian said he understood that. 2. She asked him what he thought the end of this situation looked like. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I don't know. I'm thinking about today. Today they're fine." It was not a plan. It was not a policy. It was the most honest answer she had received in 3 years of council work. She did not revoke her transfer recommendation that day. She was not ready to do that. But she asked permission to extend her observation period before any action was taken. Dorian said yes. She stood to leave and Bricks lifted her head and watched her go, not threatening, just watching, the way someone watches a person who has not yet been decided about. Voss walked out into the gray afternoon air and looked at her folder. She had arrived with a clear picture of what dragons were. She was leaving with a much more complicated one. She sat in her shuttle and wrote one line at the bottom of her official report. Primary behavioral anchor appears to be the human ranger. Recommend continued observation before action. She stared at that line for a while, then she sanded. 6 months passed the way, hard months. Do not fast, not slow but full. Sora had grown. She stood at Dorian's shoulder now, and when she walked beside him on patrol, the birds went quiet. Ahead of them, she had stopped watching the door at night. She still slept near the sound of his heartbeat, but now she slept deeply without waking. Nico had learned to fly properly mostly. His landings were still a disaster. He would get the height right, get the angle right, and then slightly misjudge the last 2 meters and overshoot the landing spot by 4. Dorian had stopped flinching when Nico crashed. Nico always got up. Brix had developed a new habit. She dug shallow burrows, not deep enough to hide in, just deep enough to sit in with the earth around her like a chair. She always dug them near wherever Dorian slept. He had started finding new ones outside the window, around the station's foundation, along the garden wall. She was mapping him in her own way, keeping track of where he was. He had changed things. His patrol routes were shorter. His supply requests now included mineral supplements, chromite for Brix, raw silica powder for Sora, scales, something high in copper that Nico burned through in a week. He had argued with the colonial supply chain about it for 2 months before Riatley approved a separate biological support budget. He had not thanked her because she had told him not to. He had not slept past 6:00 in the morning in 6 months and did not miss it. The fire started on a Tuesday. An electrical storm moved in from the east at midday. Fast, dry, with the kind of lightning that hit the ground instead of the sky. By the time the fire alarm reached Dorian's calm 2 km of eastern forest were already burning, and the wind was carrying it north toward the Aran Valley settlement. 3 colonial workers were already trapped in the forest. Their transport had gone down trying to get ahead of the fire line, and their emergency signal was coming from inside the smoke. Dorian grabbed his gear. He looked at the 3 of them, Sora already standing, Nico already at the door, Brix watching his face with her full attention. Stay, he said. He meant it. He went. He was halfway to the ridge when the wind changed behind him. He looked back. All 3 of them were there. He did not have time to be angry. The fire was loud and the smoke was already thick, and the signal from the trapped workers was not moving. He turned and kept going. Sora moved past him. She did not run. She walked with her head low, reading the wind, and then she stopped at a gap in the trees and breathed. The fire at the leading edge met something it could not cross. Not water, not dirt, a precise, controlled heat that met the wildfire head-on and then needed oxygen in a line 30 m wide. Dorian had not known she could do that. He was not sure she had known either. Nico went up. He caught altitude fast, tipped his wings, and began pushing airs, not randomly, but in long directed sweeps that bent the smoke away from the worker's signal and held it there. He looked clumsy from the ground. From the inside of what he was doing, it was very deliberate. Brix found the trapped workers before Dorian did. She dug not a garden trench, not a shallow burrow, but a full emergency channel through the burning underbrush 3 m wide and moving fast until she broke through to the hollow where the workers were pinned by fallen timber. She looked at the 3 humans crouching in the smoke, looked back the way she had come, and waited. They followed her out. The fire was stopped before it reached the valley. The colonial emergency report listed the cause as a contained front. The workers filed their own accounts separately. Their account included 3 large-scaled creatures and 1 human ranger who arrived together, worked without speaking, and left without being thanked. News reached the council. By the next morning, Voss called Dorian Directly, he was sitting on the station. Steps cleaning his boots when her face appeared on his comm. She did not say anything for a moment, then she said, "That was not what I expected, Nico's landing on the way back was also not what I expected," Dorian said. He overshot the yard and ended up on the roof. Voss looked at him. "3 people are alive because they ran toward a wildfire. They ran toward me," Dorian said. He pulled off his other boot and knocked the ash out of it. "The fire was just in the way." Voss was quiet again. "I'll send you the full report," Dorian said, "but I need to go check on Nico. He's been sitting on the roof for an hour and I don't think he knows how to come down." He closed the comm. He looked up at the roof. Nico was sitting up there with his wings folded, looking out at the horizon, like he had planned to be there the whole time. Dorian got the ladder. He landed in the open field behind the station without warning. No ship, no shuttle. He simply descended from the high clouds on wings that barely seemed to move, and when he touched the ground, the earth shifted slightly under the weight. He was old in a way that had nothing to do with size, though he was large, easily 4 times Sora's height. His scales were the dark color of stone that has been underwater for 1,000 years. His eyes were the color of pale fire. Elder Dree had survived by being elsewhere when everything ended. He had spent 200 years watching the galaxy from a distance, speaking to no one, being spoken to by no one. He had come now because the signal had reached him, not a broadcast, not a report, something older, the bondo of 3 hatchlings who had settled somewhere. He stood in the field and waited. Dorian came out first. He had heard the impact from inside and stepped out with the same expression he wore for everything, watching, measuring, not yet deciding. Then Sora came through the door. She saw Dree and went absolutely still. Then she walked forward and stood directly in front of Dorian, not beside him, in front of him. She was a fraction of Dree's size, and she did not move an inch. Nico came out next, saw Dree, and made a sound that was either a greeting or a challenge. It was not clear which, possibly not even to Nico. He went and stood next to Sora. Brix came last. She walked past both of them, looked at Dree for a moment, and then pressed her head against Dorian's hand and stayed there. Dree looked at all of this. "Human," he said. The word came clearly in old form, galactic standard, with an accent that had no modern equivalent. "I have come to see what you are." "I'm a ranger," Dorian said. "Dorian Vale, Colony World Heron IV. I know what you are called." I said, "What you are." Dree moved forward 2 steps. Sora's head lowered slightly. Dree did not look at her. He kept his gaze on Dorian. "These 3 are the last known hatchlings of a lineage that burned worlds. They are not pets. They are not companions. Do you understand what they will become?" "I know they'll grow," Dorian said. "Sora's already past my shoulder. Brix has been redigging the same section of garden for 3 weeks because she figured out her reach has gotten longer and she wants the measurements right. Nico is getting better at landing." He paused. "I know what they are. You're asking if I'm afraid. I am asking if you are foolish. Probably, but I don't think that's why you came." Dree stuttered him. "You claimed them." "They claimed me," Dorian said. "I just didn't walk away." There was a silence. Wind moved across the field. Brix had not lifted her head from Dorian's hand. Dree began to ask questions. It went on for a long time. Not hostile, not a hearing, but the kind of testing that comes from an old mind that has seen many things go wrong and needs to know if this is another one. He asked what Sora ate, how much, at what intervals. Dorian answered without hesitating. He asked how Nico responded to correction. Dorian described the raised finger, the flat tone, the difference between what worked and what made it worse. He asked about Bricks, why she always touched the ground near Dorian when she slept. I think she tracks vibrations, Dorian said. Footsteps, heartbeat through the floor. She sleeps better when she knows where I am without having to look. Dree asked about hard moments. He asked about the night Sora had woken screaming from something no one could see. He asked about the week Nico had refused to eat. He had access to information Dorian did not know had been recorded. Dorian answered everything. He did not make any of it sound heroic. He said what worked and what did not, what he had guessed at and what he had gotten wrong. Dree asked, and when they are my size, when they can level a city with a single breath, what then, Ranger? Dorian was quiet for a moment. Then I'll be standing next to them, he said. Same as now. It was not a speech. It was not a promise with conditions. It was the same flat tone he used for everything. Patrol reports, arguments with the supply chain, conversations with Bricks about the garden. This is what is true. I am telling you. Dree looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at the three hatchlings, Sora still standing between them, Nico now sitting with his head tilted, Bricks still attached to Dorian's hand. He sat down, not leaving. Settling, the bond is real, he said. It was not a compliment, it was an observation stated the same way a doctor might state that a wound had healed. Fact-checked and confirmed. He did not go back to the sky. He stayed in the field as the sun moved over it, and after a while, Nico went over to look at him. The way Nico looked at everything, new, sideways, and too close. Dree did not move. He let the hatchling look. Dorian went inside to start dinner. Sora came back to the door and sat in it, facing out, watching Dree, watching the field, keeping watch, same as always. The hearing was held on a Tuesday, which felt wrong for something this significant. Dorian sat in a plain chair in the Colonial Assembly room in front of a projection screen the size of a wall. On it were 7 council representatives from 5 different species, 3 legal advisors, and 1 translator for each legal team. The room on his side had Commander Ray, Ambassador Voss, and a colonial attorney who had spent the past 2 weeks reading 200 years of species law, and told Dorian honestly that there was no precedent for any of this. Dree had requested to address the council. Chamber had gone very quiet when that request came in. A living dragon voluntarily addressing the galactic council was not something anyone in the room had expected to see in their lifetime. The council asked their questions first. They asked Dorian about the initial contact. He described it plainly. Crater 3 hatchlings, 4 hours to wait, the decision to go down. He did not make it dramatic. He stated what happened. They asked about the wildfire. He said they followed me into a dangerous situation. That's not unusual. They also stopped the fire and got 3 workers out of the smoke, which I want on record because my report listed the cause as contained front end. That was not the complete picture. One of the council members leaned forward. You corrected your own report in a formal hearing. It was incomplete. Dorian said, "That bothers me more than whatever you're going to decide today." There was a pause. Vice off-screen pressed her lips together in an expression that was close to a smile. The council asked the question everyone had been building toward. What happened when three apex glacis creatures reached full maturity on a colonial world with no containment infrastructure and only one human ranger as behavioral anchor? Dorian said the same thing. That happens now, they'll be who they are. I'll be there. That is not a plan, said the head of the council committee. No, Dorian agreed, it's a fact. Plans can change, that won't. Then Dree spoke. He had been standing in the field outside the building, visible through the window, too large to come inside, connected to the proceedings by an external audio feed. When he began, the room went completely quiet, not from procedure, from something older. His voice was low and even, and carried the kind of weight that only comes from something that has watched centuries pass. He said he had come to assess the bond. He said he had tested the human, his knowledge, his patience, his honesty, his understanding of what he held and what it would one day become. He said he had found no deception and no failure of understanding. He said the bond between these three hatchlings and this human was confirmed under observation. Then he said the thing that made every legal advisor in the room start writing very fast, under dragon law, which predates this council by 10,000 years and has never been revoked by any treaty. This body has signed a confirmed bond of claiming is a declaration of lineage. These three are claimed. The human is their family. This is not a request for recognition. It is a statement of existing fact. The head of the committee looked at his advisors. His advisors looked at each other. One of them pulled up a database on a screen that had clearly not been opened in a long time. The hearing ran for another 40 minutes. Then it ended. No transfer order was issued. The three of them were watching the broadcast on the screen at the station. Ray had arranged the feed before leaving for the assembly room. Sora sat straight, perfectly still, reading everything on Dorian's face in the projection. Nico had watched the first 20 minutes lying upside down on the couch and had then migrated to the floor, where he was now lying flat with his chin on the rug, making occasional sounds at the screen. Brix had climbed into the corner, wrapped herself as small as she could go, and had not moved since Dree started speaking. When the feed ended and Dorian's face on the screen shifted from careful to simply tired, Sora stood up and walked to the door. She sat in it and faced out at the afternoon, the way she sat when she was keeping watch. Nico got up, crossed the room, and hit Dorian in the side at full speed. It was absolutely a hug. Dorian grabbed the doorframe to stay upright and said, "Yeah, all right, I know, get off." Nico did not get off. He made the untranslatable sound, the one from the crater, the one that meant found after lost, the one that had never stopped, meaning that Brix unfolded herself from the corner. She walked over slowly. She was larger now, nearly too large for what she was about to do, and she did it anyway. She put her head in Dorian's lap and stayed there, heavy and warm and completely certain of where she was. He put his arms around as much of her as he could reach. It was not very much. He did it anyway. Outside, Dree sat in the field in the long late night light, and for the first time in 200 years he was near something that felt like the word home, even if it was not his. The galaxy had expected monsters it had found. Something it did not have a word for. 3 creatures who had crossed the dark of space, lost everything, and landed in a place where one ordinary man did not walk away. They called him their family. He called them his. Neither of them thought it needed any more explanation than that.